When does healthy acceptance become dysfunctional? Background. I have studied psychology and lots of different philosophies and practices since my teenage years for about 30 years, but I still feel stuck. I tend to feel most comfortable reading, observing, doing some practices, and dealing with what comes my way with as much equanimity as possible. Being a mother for the past 18 years and struggling with relationships has brought lots to deal with my way. And I felt maxed out with handling all that. I feel that I've done a pretty good job with my children. However, I feel like I've lost or maybe never had a strong sense of agency, a sense of making decisions that are good for me and carrying them out in the world. I feel like I'm using meditation and spiritual practices as an excuse not to act and take risks outside of my family life. Question. When does acceptance turn into the dysfunctional as being a doormat in inverted commas, not acting on desires, not exercising a healthy sense of agency? And why does this happen? Also, can you please shed light on the apparent duality between desire and acceptance? That's a good question. Very good question. Before we even go into this, I would like to invite a possibility that certain terms in the language we speak can play tricks on us. And you, as someone who has studied psychology, philosophy, and practiced for many, many years, as you mentioned here, for 30 years, should know that more than most. I tend to notice, and I cannot help but notice that is very often misunderstood, how the term acceptance is being mixed up with the term resignation. Not that resignation cannot be used in a positive stance. It can be used in a positive stance. But acceptance and resignation have two different meanings. Acceptance, generally speaking, it's a very deep realization that every moment is the way that essentially expresses the totality of everything which is encapsulated in that moment for the consciousness which experiences itself as that moment. I would like to repeat that, if only I could, for you to have a very, very clear insight that the moment itself is not just the moment. It's not just this moment is like this. And if I enjoy it, then I'm being in the moment. And if I don't enjoy that moment, that I somehow miss that moment. But every moment, from the perspective of the one who undergoes this experience, is nothing other than the infinite multitude of points of view, and each and every moment experienced as this multitude of infinite points of view is what consciousness is all about. This is what in some spiritual traditions called the drama of life. In this enormous stage, in this grand stage, different mise-en-scenes taking place. different acts are being performed. Some act may feel and seem as very important, right? The life of this football player, or the life of this actor, or the life of this artist, or the life of this spiritual teacher, or the life of this president, or the light of this so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, may seem so big, so important, larger than life. Simultaneously, there are many, many insignificant peripheral stories that go unnoticed to anyone. This is a perception of an ignorant, uneducated mind. As simple as that. Let's not even try to justify this with some kind of ready-made analogies that, oh, everything is... No, this is simply misunderstanding that everything happens not through some kind of independent agency. All this is within and for the sake. Within and for the sake of one without a second. Okay, fine, I hear you. It's maybe a flicker here of that, a flash of intellectual insight, but then it wanes, it subsides. Where does it leave us? How helpful to hear that. It's a reminder, maybe it will work today. If all my faculties are in balance, if there is sattva prevalent, I will get that, and that will carry me through this moment till the next. But the understanding that this experience, every single experience, belongs to that, if you will, now in other perspective, is the result of billion years of evolution. Every single moment is the result of the billions years of evolution that are preceding to that moment, to the next, because the moment, essentially, to the moment, it's that seamless flow. It's the seamless flow of consciousness, just as the oil is being poured from one container into another in one uninterrupted stream. But it is perceived from that human perspective through the sequence of events, because our consciousness tends to break. Our consciousness tends to break. It tends to break to when we go to sleep, when we wake up, deep sleep, dreams, waking state. Here I am more conscious. The next moment, as it were, I am as if in a daze. So I cannot say I was fully present. Therefore we say that. I'm not fully present. Sorry, can you say that again? I haven't slept well. You see, there is this continuity, as it were, is broken. We don't feel the seamlessness of consciousness. That is from the human perspective, of course. And this is why there are spiritual practices to overcome that predicament. But the acceptance we speak about is that. It's acceptance of each moment as it is, because it's unique, if you will, significant, if you will, divine, if you will. Doesn't matter what mise-en-scène of life it belongs to. Doesn't matter what plays it involves. It is unique and important because it belongs to the fullness of consciousness. It belongs to that plethora of consciousness. It's important. For the one who is sipping coffee somewhere in a small coffee shop in Manhattan with a bagel, that is the entire universe in that bagel, in that cup of coffee. If you trained in Zen, you will have full enjoyment. Every galaxy will be in that bagel, in that salmon, and in that double espresso. Nothing else would be lacking in that experience. Likewise, someone who is somewhere in a remote village in China, having his cup of tea, right, going about his daily duties, will feel just as fulfilled and just as important as someone who is on Oprah Winfrey show, or, you make these examples, and quite frankly, I'm done with this, with these examples. It's all just for the sake of entertainment. It's just because we have these hang-ups Because our culture is as such. It instructs us to make us this essentially understanding that some life is significant, other life is not significant. And then, of course, our life has to fit somewhere. It has to fit somewhere with its significance or insignificance. Recognize this for what it is. And I advise you to see this as a hang-up. Don't be afraid of that. Don't feel that I'm being dismissive. It's a hang-up because it's being literally fostered with the mother's milk and this culture. It's the collective culture that we share. You see? Therefore, and you read enough, you know enough psychology, you read enough philosophy, you know that everything is a reflection of the greater whole. Everything. So this is where acceptance comes from. This is where the acceptance comes from. So acceptance here is not like my life is miserable and I ought to accept that. That's a resignation. That's not acceptance. Acceptance always accompanied by great sense of peace and dare I say, a gentle sense of bubbling within of that something which is nothing other than the ananda of our own. When we truly accept something, not only it is accompanied by greater peace, it is also accompanied by a release of joy. You see? It's a positive experience. Resignation could be just resigning. Resigning. Yes, it may have that heroic act. I resigned my life for my kids. I've resigned my life for the service of this ideology. I've been brainwashed and completely wasted my life for being this, being a communist, being a Republican, being a fascist. Oops, don't put these two together. Erase it, don't put it out on the YouTube. It doesn't matter. All these are the same. These are just categories within mental, essentially, aggregate. It's just something. We all serve some ideologies here. Some ideologies better than others. So find the one that really suits you. You studied philosophy. Find the philosophy which gives you that sense, which supports your sense of well-being. Philosophy in itself, of course, is a beauty. Like Schopenhauer said, it's the domain of kings. It's not for the mere mortals. It's not for the simpleton. You need to have refinement. There has to be a propensity, the internal swelling and welling of souls where one can appreciate the refinement of thought. That's what philosophy is. Love for wisdom. Philosophia. Philosophia, the love for wisdom. It cannot be given to everyone. But philosophy cannot be turned into an intellectual exercise as some kind of keeps us afloat, as you said, like you're most happy when you read. No, philosophy has to create, literally has to create the ground upon which we can stand. It has to give us that foundational ground which will support all our endeavors. Then this is philosophy in action. This is philosophy which actually truly being lived. So the love for wisdom part here is important, isn't it? The wisdom part. Where's the wisdom part if we're not applying it? If we're not applying it, it's not wisdom. We cannot call it wisdom. We can call it information. We can call it knowledge even if we prefer. But wisdom applies that we live by it, held by it, upheld by it. So, going back to your question with this acceptance turned into dysfunctional. You see, I'm not even going into that because first I would like you to see where acceptance turned into resignation and where you confuse the two. So that you fully understand that when acceptance takes place, when there is an act of acceptance, when there is enough of acceptance, there is always fullness. That fullness comes from the realization that nothing is insignificant or small. Hang on again, you may say, but why doesn't that fullness give me that sense of fulfillment? Then that's a totally different story. That's a totally different ball game. So this is where you need to see that it's not that acceptance turned dysfunctional and you became essentially that rag which everyone wipes their feet because there is not enough standing for yourself. This is, forgive me, a sorry feeling for yourself slips in. And you need to look into that, where that sorry for yourself comes into play. For someone who studied philosophy for 30 years, it's a legitimate question. Forgive me, I feel we can speak on that equal basis, because 30 years of studying philosophy, there has to be enough understanding that no one can wipe their feet on us simply because it's impossible. We know that that's not to be true. We know that that is an idea in us inherently coming from that sense of not being complete, and we need to look and find where that is coming from. The wise feels satisfied and fulfilled in all situations, not because some situations or all situations are equal. No, because one understands that every situation essentially completes the picture. The fullness itself presupposes that there is essentially very different shades, very different hues. You also ask here, please shed light on the apparent duality between desire and acceptance. You see? In other words, I hear where the questions come from, and I understand that what you wish for is, on one hand, of course, a greater sense of clarity, but also you want to kind of grok it. You want to understand how does that work. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the main question is being somehow sidelined. It's as if it's too uneasy to go in that main question. It's as if it requires asking of you too much. It's as if maybe even there is a sense of fear to go into the real question. So therefore we prefer to ask the question in relation to more peripheral matters, though they sound so important. What's the difference between desire and acceptance? Aren't we supposed to desire here as these living beings? At least, this teacher speaks from the perspective of Tantra. Tantra says yes, not no. Tantra doesn't bash desires, no overlooks them, no tries to shovel them down, no tries to suppress them. But how does acceptance sit with desire? What does philosophy that we've studied tells us about it? What the Greek philosophy tells us about that? What the pre-Socratics tells us about that? What the philosophy of Lao Tzu tells us about that? The answers are already there. You know them already. You cannot not know them because you came across them already many times. But you ask me a question, so I have to now stand to the task. I need to respond to that question. You see, it's not as black and white. Yes, every desire, absolutely, every desire is divine in its essence as it rises from nowhere but that place within. Everything rises from that as an impulse until it is getting closer and closer to the surface level of manifestation, where it is essentially begins to get colored by a specific impulse. Of course, this impulse is getting more and more direction as it is then in turn colored by all this, what the surface life is known for. Even if we apply any understanding where we know that this sensory level of enjoyment and this mental sphere of activities, feeling, emotions, this is where that desire is being, as it were, experienced as desire that belongs to me, desire that belongs to this particular individual, this particular story, this particular character. And it is already then colored by a whole circumstances which then we can say that this is my desire. Desire itself is innocent. Desire itself rises from where everything else rises. If not for that, there will be no creation. Therefore, there are different philosophies also, different perspectives. There are perspectives that deny this world precisely because it is based on that and is supported by these very mechanics where desire is the driving force. There are other perspectives, of course, where that desire is not denied and discarded precisely because the world is being considered as the very result of that legitimate desire for consciousness to express itself. I am one, let me be many, as the Upanishadic line declares, right? As that the line that belongs to that progenitor, that in Sanskrit Prajapati, that first, if you will, being. In this case, we're not even speaking in terms of form, just beingness of being. I am one, let me be many. There is this swelling in that oneness. What that is, if it's not a desire, what that is. It is a desire. I am one, let me be many. And in that, a tremendous energy is released. So that oneness is offered, as it were, in the act of dismembering itself into that multiplicity, into that diversity. In other words, unity is diversified out of its own desire, perhaps to behold itself from as many points of view as that unity can afford, which in case we have forgotten that is infinite, then there's infinite points of view to behold its magnificence. So desire is not a problem. Desire itself doesn't stand in any way in opposition to acceptance, nor it creates any predisposition for a predicament. But when desire begins to get colored, as it surfaces to the level where that desire is being picked by a living being, and of course the difference here is what is the level of consciousness of this or that being. The level of our experience is colored by the level of our consciousness. The level of our perception is colored by the level of our consciousness. It cannot be otherwise. So for the consciousness which is totally identified with this living organism, with this conglomerate, then that desire can be enjoyable or very painful. Enjoyable as long as one is experiencing that desire, and it turns painful because one realizes one cannot fulfill that desire. we could bring simple examples how some spiritual traditions make emphasis precisely there, right there. The whole Buddhism is found on this premises that every joy essentially is the other side of pain. If there is a joy, there must be a pain. If there is pleasure, in other words, it has to be accompanied by pain because it cannot be otherwise. Everything that rises has to fall. Everything that has a peak experience will have its bottom. Every peak has its valley. In this case, every peak of pleasurable experience will culminate in pain one way or the other. That's the Buddhist perspective. Sukha dukkha, exemplified in these terms. These are cornerstones of understanding. Not that I teach Buddhism, I just use this because it's very direct. And it's used obviously by teachers, not just in Buddhism, it's used widely. You can find these analogies in many different traditions, and it is the emphasis that desire essentially is being blamed as soon as there is this realization that desire eventually, that what brings us that sense of being uneasy about life. And desire is very often paired with or equated with disease because it's the end of being at ease, dis-ease. The desire brings that situation. But it's not the desire itself, you see. Desire is innocent. It's the swelling, rising, something coming to the surface. But soon as it is picked and interpreted, then it becomes desire for this particular person, for this particular car, for this particular food, for this particular enjoyment, for this particular house, for this particular situation, for this particular climate, for this, and the list is enormous, the list is huge. And we constantly, we live essentially under the constant bed of these rising desires that let themselves known, and there's no end to it. So the only way to reconcile that, what you pose in the question, to reconcile acceptance and desire, where the desire plays role and where the acceptance plays role, is precisely in that there's no contradiction in acceptance and the desire. They rise in the same place, they come from the same place. That the wise person doesn't desire less. This is also those misconceptions. The so-called awakened, enlightened being doesn't desire less. It is that these desires no longer has sway over their psyche. That's as simple as that. They come and go without leaving a trace, without leaving an imprint on what otherwise is known to that being who lives in that level of consciousness, where all this is. But before that happens, there are some healthy, of course, ways of how to master this, of how to be at ease with desires that rise. Maharishi used to beautifully say that turn the desire back to where it came from. Don't rush, don't run after the desires throughout life. Suffice you know you have these desires, but turn them at every occasion back into your heart and let them gently subside there. There are methodologies. You go to sleep, you sit down in meditation. You don't sit down in meditation in agony of like, I want to fulfill these desires. Let me om, and let me transcend and get it all done and over with, or let me have all this through some powers, some psychic powers and some stuff. No, the meditation, the healthy attitude in meditation is that all this is let it go back to where it comes from. I'm offering myself into this silence. All this diversity, all this diversification, let it be reposed, even if for this 20 minutes or an hour. I go to sleep, let me sleep in full awareness that everything is good as it is. Even if I'm about to die or someone in my surrounding is about to die, because what can I do? I'm going to drift into sleep anyway. Or then get out of bed and continue worrying. Take a ride, take a bicycle ride, horse ride, walk, you know what I'm trying to say? One way or the other, we constantly dying to what is rising, and these desires rise and go. But when we get hung up and hang on with certain desires, that we feel that our life is not fulfilled because of this or that, it's like the bug. It's like this certain sense that prevents us from being in this very moment. This is the true acceptance, or where the true acceptance can come. The true acceptance can only come from a place that nothing could have been better, because that's the way it is. Yes, I could have done that better, I could have done this better, I could have done the upbringing of these kids better, I could have done this picture better, I could have done that film better, I could have done that married life better, I could have been done better with or without a partner. You see? Endlessly different variations. When in fact it's perfectly orchestrated and arranged, so intricately, beautifully done in just exactly the way it is. Just like recognize it for what it is. That beauty of that sacred geometry, of the precision with which your moment and your life is woven and made into next. And rest in that. Rest in that. And if all this philosophy and philosophical books did not help, maybe put them, give them to the public library, give them to someone to read, and get down with the practices that will work. That's also a solution. Because it has to work. If what we've learned failed to deliver, we should not lament where all this knowledge and why that is. We should look for a possible visceral situation where we can remedy that. So I want you to create that intent now within yourself, that you're going to create a possibility where that knowledge that makes you feel happy will be translated into the platform of happiness itself, where you can stand on. And then, once that is created, you will see where the consciousness, your own awareness, will direct you. Maybe it will take you somewhere and some places you haven't been before. And then all this, what you have considered your life to be, will be less relevant. Somehow it will be rendered with that veil of sfumata of the past, and who cares what was before, as long as I'm fully present here for what is now. Huh? I think Eckhart Tolle will be quite happy.